Boa tarde a todas e a todos. Obrigado pela presença, pela vossa presença, estudantes e comunidade extra-académica. Eu vou passar imediatamente ao inglês, porque a sessão está a ser gravada e vai ser colocada online dentro de dias. E como todo o debate vai ser em inglês, farei a apresentação da Grace Ndiritu em inglês. Mas só para contextualizar o público que chega pela primeira vez aqui, o Great Artists on Campus é um ciclo de talks, de conferências, que decorre aqui na Universidade Lusófona. É o segundo ciclo, o primeiro aconteceu com grande sucesso no semestre anterior, e a ideia é que a universidade seja um lugar de convergência de públicos, que não seja um lugar só para os estudantes, mas um lugar que convida a cidade a vir escutar os melhores do nosso tempo no meio da arte contemporânea. Portanto, bem-vindos, obrigado. Espero que esta seja a primeira de várias talks em que nos acompanhem. Eu vou passar a apresentação da Grace Ndiritu em inglês. Grace Ndiritu, thank you very much for being with us. I will do a short presentation of you and then pass you the word before the screening. Just a short bio. Grace Ndiritu is a British Kenyan visual artist, filmmaker and writer whose artworks are connected with the transformation of our contemporary world. Her archive of over 40 handcrafts videos, textiles, photography, performances, paintings and architectural spaces have been widely exhibited, most recently in her mid-career survey entitled Healing the Museum at SMAC Ghent in Belgium in 2023. Her work has been featured in Art Forum, Art Review, The Guardian, Time Magazine, The Financial Times, etc. Her films, Black Beauty and Becoming Plant, that we will watch immediately, have been selected for prestigious film festivals, including the Berlinale in Berlin, the Festival of Marseille, and the London Film Festival. And Grace Ndiritu is the winner of the Jarman Award in 2022. Her work is also housed in museum collections, such as the Metropolitan Museum of New York, the LACMA of Los Angeles, the Migros from Zurich, Photo Museum of Antwerp, the British Council, London, and several others, like the Walter Collection of New York. It's a very short resume of your bio, Grace Ndiritu. Thank you very much. Peço uma salva de palmas para a Grace Ndiritu.
Hello. I won't really say so much because otherwise I'll spoil the films, but and there's a lot to say afterwards. Thank you for coming, and shall we begin?
Yes.
Yep.
Thank you. So we'll watch two films, Black Beauty and few seconds of Black, and we start second screening, Becoming Plant. And right after, we start a conversation with Grace Ndiritu, okay? Good films. beautiful movies, I think, and very different. To start our conversation, Grace Ndiritu, I'd start by questioning that. Could you comment these two films? We were talking at lunchtime that they are so different, apparently, but with so strong zones of contact. Can you tell us a little bit about this comparison between the two of them?
Yes, I mean, for me it's quite it's quite difficult and complicated to answer that question simply. I mean, I guess they're both connected in terms of their experimental cinematography and their way that they're talking about the mind and different states of the mind. And I think that's something we'll get into more in depth, but I'll simply say that.
So let's go back. In Black Beauty, there is this beautiful sentence saying that Cervantes judged himself as a poet. You, Grace Ndiritu, as a post-medium artist, a filmmaker, do you consider yourself an artist, a filmmaker, a poet? How do you consider?
Well, I guess I consider myself as a visual artist and a filmmaker and a writer. I mean, my first study was textile art, so that's actually fashion and textiles. And then I spent 10 years really focused on making video art. And I kind of differentiate between video art and film in the sense of the videos, these handcrafted videos, I would either perform in them or edit them and direct them myself, and they're very, very low budget. And then with film, you know, I'm working with a crew, I've normally written a script, so it's a kind of a different methodology. But from the beginning, I always thought about this idea of enlightening the viewer through the medium of film and video. And this was always in contrast to the way that the media use the same, you know, whether it's advertising or the news, they kind of engender fear through the way that they edit and use images. And so I was always very interested in how you could use the same medium to transmit energy. And so in my first videos, I would put myself in different states of trance and then film them and then look at them in a normal reality again. And so, yes, that's what I did for about 10 years. And then I started to open up again my practice, incorporating textiles and painting and photography. And now I do quite big installations and architectural interventions. Yep.
And the big word in your universe, in your repertory, it's shamanism. We have in the first movie this quote that says Borges is apolitical, and we have in both films an idea, especially in the second one, an idea of healing. And first time I contact with your work in FOMO, in the Photography Museum of Antwerp, in Belgium. It was so touching to see that you were curating an exhibition as a healing space. And then I saw in SMAC in Ghent, in Belgium also, the Healing Museum project, where Grace Ndiritu is working with the collections, the colonial collections in particular, but others also, rebuilding new senses, re-signifying these collections, these artifacts, these objects, these images and representations, as a process of healing our society, or healing pains of our society, or inner problems. So shamanism, can you talk a little bit about this big word, because it goes behind theory, it goes behind art, it goes behind militantism?
Yeah, I mean, for me, there's two answers. There's like the personal answer, you know, me as a person. I've always been working with animism and shamanism since I was a child. But then there's the kind of, let's say, more artistic answer. So in 2012, I was really disillusioned with what was going on in museums, and so I decided to quit everything and actually go and live off-grid and live more in nature. And I started this project called Healing the Museum. So I decided to bring these kind of non-rational methodologies like shamanism and meditation into museums. And so I would work with the objects, I would work with the staff, and I would work with the public. And sometimes over a long period of time. So like at SMAC, I was there for 1 year and working behind the scenes. But then I was also very interested in ideas about how we value objects and why we value objects. And so I started writing essays about this. And this project, it's been going on for over 10 years, actually, the Healing Museum project.
And shamanism is also about non-linear time, right?
Exactly.
Can you talk a little bit about this? Because it's a very important issue in the first film.
Yeah, I mean, this idea of non-linearity is really key to my understanding. Well, not only as a person of being in the world, being half nomadic, half settler in terms of my family background, but also in terms of negotiating time, so always being in and out of time. And so that was really important for me to think about how I can transmit that to cinema. And so from the very beginning, I've been thinking, in the early videos, like I said, when I would put myself in different states of trance and then look back and see the performance and to see how the body was. And then also I was really interested in Raul Ruiz. He's a Chilean filmmaker. And he would talk about the idea of poetic objects and the shamanic cinema. And then I was always thinking that my handcrafted videos were connected to this idea of the poetic object versus, industrialized cinema. And so, this non-linearity started in that fact.
In Black Beauty, the first frame or the first sequence we have is this long traveling on this black female, naked body, right? And of course, in my mind, it recalls me one of the first sequences of Le Mépris of Jean-Luc Godard, where we have this traveling over Brigitte Bardot's naked body, a white female naked woman. So can you tell us a little bit about this traveling over this naked body to open up your film?
Yeah, well, funny enough, that's not the reference. I was thinking more of the James Bond silhouette. That's actually, that was one of the things, but on a deeper level. I was thinking about this idea of terra nullius, the empty land, how, when the colonialists went to Africa or Australia, they would see land and think that no one lived there and that they could conquer it. So it's kind of like that. It's like a mixture of that and James Bond. It's kind of, in terms of the visuality. But then really it's to do with the research behind the film. And so years ago I saw, I think in 2004, I'd seen, 2004? Oh, no, maybe later. I'd seen a documentary on PBS about the first people who had gone to Patagonia and that they had been from Africa. And so this was kind of a controversial theory because, as it says in the film, in Argentina, people always want to think that their heritage is connected to do with Europe and not Africa. It's obviously a different history than Brazil and things. And so, yes, that had already stuck in my mind. And also, I'd always been kind of obsessed with this idea of Patagonia. And I'd read Bruce Chatwin's book many years ago as well, in Patagonia. And his great uncle had been in Darwin's ship and had gone to Patagonia and found part of a woolly mammoth and brought it back to England. And so there was all these ideas about my ancestry, from East Africa, could have accidentally ended up in Patagonia because of the way that the people from East Africa, they were trying to migrate to Australia on these dugout canoe boats, but then they'd actually accidentally ended up in Terra del Fuego and then got stuck there until the other people had migrated through the Bering Seas, you know, and gone down that way, and then they'd met. And so all these ideas to do with that is kind of, you know, underneath that silhouette. That's what her body is representing underneath. You wouldn't know that, you know, you're just looking, you know, but for me, that's why I started the film with her body. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you have this conversation, you can talk a little bit more about it because it was shot in Madrid in a very special studio that is a church, right?
Yeah.
With cameras and lighting tools of the 80s. So we can have this quality of archive, a fake archive. I'd like to listen to more about it. But my question is, why this friction between a female model that has as rule Karen Roberts and an actor, a real one, that plays the figure of Jorge Luis Borges? Why this friction between two performances so different?
Well,
a fashion model and an actor.
Yeah, I mean, in the first sequence, you're seeing her, she's called Alexandra Cartier, and she's doing this advert for Black Beauty Cream. And then, you know, but as a model, everyone always just thinks she's just pretty and she should repeat the words. But in her head, she thinks, oh, I'm an intellectual kind of thing. And so when she goes in her shamanic vision, she's interviewing Borges. And then, you know, for me, it's the history of radical TV, because like in the 60s, 70s, 80s, maybe until the 90s, there were always very late night TV shows, and there were always, you know, conversations between two intellectuals, and they were always white men like Foucault and Chomsky, and I mean, and they were great in conversations. They were, but they were always, you know, and they were always debating the meaning of life, and it was, you know, 1 a.m. and they were smoking and they were drinking or whatever. And so I just loved that. But then I thought, no, it needs to be more relevant to me, because I would want to have those conversations with them, you know. So, and also it's of now. So that's the complicated thing about the film, because it's playing with different times and different histories. And so the chemistry I like between them, you know, because at first, you know, she seems young and, you know, and this, but then she also holds her own against Borges and questions him and, you know, makes fun of him a little bit. And I think that they have a good banter back and forth.
Kind of match. She provokes him, and she...
Exactly.
I find very funny when she says, no, go on.
Yes.
She's the ruler somehow. Can you tell us more about the shooting in a church in Madrid and the tools you used? You wanted really a quality of archive image, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I always wanted that late night television imagery, and it's always, you know, it's always was either going to be Betacam or, you know, VHS or something like that. And then it was just really lucky that we found this church where we could make a set, and they had 2 exact old cameras in the attic, you know, and it was incredible because we'd been looking for ages and ages, and then, yeah, it just all kind of came together. And then the other footage is shot on an Alexa film camera, which is very expensive, you know, but it has a beautiful quality, a very cinematic quality. So it was a good balance between the 2 parts of the film.
You talk about shamanism, but and non-linear time, and there is another notion that I think is important for us in academy, that is anachrony or anachronism. In both films, we feel that we are somewhere in the time, outside chronological time, that's for sure. And the physical spaces, they are a manifest of it. The quarry, right, like a geological ruin, and the industrial ruin.
Yes.
Can you talk us a little bit about it? Anachronism, being outside. You talk a little bit already.
Yes, I think it's because of the way that I wrote the film. So I had this idea for Black Beauty about 10 years before I actually made the film, because I'd seen the documentary. I'd gone to Argentina to do some residency for my visual art practice. So I'd done a lot of research myself, but nobody wanted to fund a film about African migration and climate change. No one was interested. So then I was like, okay, forget it. And then I'd do other things, and then I'd come back. And then eventually I found someone, Arts Catalyst, who gave me some money to go and do a residency where I could speak to scientists, you know, because I wanted to speak to geneticists and scientists in Argentina who were working on, you know, what's happening in terms of climate there. And then I also had another residency. So I took this very long bus journey all the way from the top of Patagonia to the bottom. And I wrote the script basically overnight on the bus, like on my phone. Like it kind of just came as a channel, because that's how I write anyway, like even essays. It kind of came as like this kind of very long thing. And, you know, I was writing on this long night bus journey. And then when I got to Buenos Aires eventually, then I edited it and worked on it, you know, for a few weeks after that. And so that's why I think also it has this weird in and out of time, because it is, you know, this feeling of moving and being still at the same time. And yeah, that was a key factor. Yeah.
And you talk about a special movie that was a reference for you. Zabrisky's Point of
Yes.
Michelangelo Antonioni. Can you talk a little bit about this reference?
Yeah, I think I mean, for me, I'm really interested in New American cinema anyway. That's my favourite period of cinema, like early 70s. And I think it's actually also, yeah, to go back to your point about the landscape and the ruined landscape, I think he's a good example of body and landscape, and also about the political process, because the film is political at the same time. It's looking at the war, Vietnam War and stuff. But then also I think something actually, which I only realised more later recently, about Stalker and Tarkovsky, you know, this in and out of time. The places where you can't really tell. It could be the past, it could be the future, it could be now, you know, but this whole thing of this debate between nature and industrialization, you know, and the body and the individual versus, you know, the collective kind of thing.
So the notion of progress and future are
yes.
Occidental notions and modern notions that you touch and you decompose little by little in your work,
Yes.
I think. Can you talk a little bit about this myth, the myth of progress and myth of...
Well, she says it when she
Future.
says they're trying to get to a place that no longer exists. So this idea of that these, you know, people are swimming across, you know, the Mediterranean, risking their lives, trying to get somewhere, because they have been sold this idea through, you know, Western imperialism that there's this perfect Eden place. But, you know, it's a myth, because it was never perfect in the first place. And the only way it even became to be perfect was through going somewhere else, you know, and doing slavery and colonialism. And then, so it's like the whole thing is a myth. So this idea of progress, what is progress? You know, and I think, for example, I went to visit your lovely monument.
Padrão dos descobrimentos.
Yes, and this is a perfect example of this idea of, you know, this huge monument made in the 1940 for these discoveries that doesn't make any sense at all. Like it's just, yeah, I don't understand why they would make this thing. So, yeah, I think it's the same idea, isn't it? You know, that you're selling this idea. And then you wonder why people want to come, you know, and migrate here. And then, yeah, but it's a sadness, because it's not true. You're like, you sold them something that's not true.
But yesterday when you were visiting it, you saw...
Oh, God, yeah, that was funny.
You saw the direct answer to that.
Yeah, so when I visited it yesterday, because obviously it's a very touristy thing to do, and most tourists don't really know what they're looking at. I mean, they know they're looking at sculpture and Columbus, but they don't really understand the whole, reason why it might be problematic. But anyway, there was this amazing woman from Africa. I guess she's from Angola. I don't know. Anyway, she was singing Tina Turner songs about not needing another hero and things, and it was so ironic that like all these and then she's singing "Don't Need It," and then there's Columbus, and then it was like I was like, this is nuts, this is perfect. So yeah, I feel like it's connected somehow to the film.
Of course it is. And the conversation between Borges and Karen Roberts finishes with we have several items that we understand they are not from '84. But you finished with Steve Jobs and Apple. Why do you finish with this mention of Steve Jobs and?
Because it's about technology, like how actually 1984 is when the world really went wrong and like capitalism began and the whole thing really went to shit. And so I think really Steve Jobs has a lot to answer for. Yeah, I think also because in the film I'm using different technologies, like I said, Betacam, mini-DV, HD, digital, and then you've got these different timelines. You've got the 1983, you've got the 1978 timeline in the desert, and then you've got this 1983 interview, and then you've got this mention of 1984. So, but also, Borges died in 1986, but he's talking about the Rio summit in 1992. So you've got like this in and out again, but you only know this like if you know a lot of weird details about Borges, So.
And Grace Ndiritu was telling me that online people write her asking for this book of Borges, and they think these images from the film are really an archive from TV.
Yeah.
So,
and it's quite funny because in a way it's a compliment. That it's not just one, but many people are like, wow, where did you get that footage, and how did you make them say what you wanted to say, and all this kind of thing. And then I'm like, I'm like, no, I wrote the thing. It's like it was a lot of work to make that script. So it's two ways, isn't it?
This is about hybridism, right? We feel we are in a
exactly
uncertain zone. Can you tell us your main relation with you are fighting or answering or dealing with is postmodernism, it's colonialism, it's capitalism, is Western culture in general, or are all these different layers in the same X?
Yeah, I think they're all connected. I don't think it's just one or the other. You mean in general in my practice?
Yes,
or,
in your practice.
Yeah, in general, because I would say in terms of like I've been writing a lot of books about theory and stuff about politics and, two types of essays, either about exhibition making and, or about Trump and racism. And the two things do collide, through culture and meaning. So I feel like, I'm very interested in modernism and postmodernism and even, beyond that. So.
In the first movie, and to finish Black Beauty, there is this meditation about the madness of Western white men, but Europeans in particular. This obsession by collecting objects and to buy, instead of these ideas of secret, nature, and magic. And what you are developing in these films, but also in your project Healing the Museum, it's about it.
Yes.
What can we do with these collections? It's not denying it, it's not continuing as they are, but it's something else, right? Rediscovering.
Well, because as I was saying, I'm interested in why we collect things. Like, you know, how we value objects. So normally in a museum, you value things monetarily first, then culturally, then spiritually. But a lot of the objects in ethnographic museums were made for rituals and made for purposes. So it's a denial of the object's own agency, to deny what it was meant to be, in a sense. And then you have this idea of like, we're just collecting, well, in the West, just collecting for no reason anymore, because you've got millions and millions and millions of objects in museums that will never see the light of day. And the idea that even if you gave all the objects back that are in the Louvre back to, I don't know, the source countries, you'd still have millions and millions of objects, because you've got you know, when somebody would go somewhere, it's not like they would just buy one pot. They'd buy 200 pots that are basically nearly the same, or they'd steal one sword, they'd buy 3,000. So you've got just replicas of everything. So, yeah, this is one thing, you know, I'm interested in this. It is a kind of madness. It's a kind of mental illness to be continuously collecting and then having to preserve things that actually, you know, imagine in that time that pot could have been a receptacle bin, you know, just for rubbish. Like in the Roman times, that was probably just a rubbish bin. But for us, it's like a pot, you know, like a pot. So it's like, I'm very interested in this hierarchy of like how we end up, you know, valuing things. And also, because it says something about how we value ourselves as well. You know, how we value some people more than other people. And yeah.
Of course. Becoming Plant, it's this beautiful film, so different, and I have saw it in other conditions, and to see today in a real screen in a theater is really very special, because it's very physical, and we see the bodies in this real scale, almost one-to-one. But it's an hybrid also, because we don't understand who are these people, what are they doing there. They really they took something to have an experience, a collective experience, or not, or it's a fiction.
No, they really did take something.
Okay, can you tell us about it, this tension between fiction and documentary?
So I tried to make it more like a laboratory, a setting. So all those sections, apart from obviously the last sequence when they're dancing, they have taken something. So the first section when he's making the, you know, cocktail, and then they're in the pillows, and, you know, in the sections where they're laughing, they are actually high. So, but I thought ethically I don't want to film them naked high, you know, when they're doing like the dancing. And so, yeah, the film is really just about deconstructing the mind, and how, you know, the process of not only taking the psilocybin and going on your own trip, but how to show the collective trip, you know, as a way of showing how we can be together as people on this journey. And yeah, so the way I made it was because for Black Beauty, like I said, I wrote a script, and then for this, it was more like, it didn't need to be a script, but I wrote very distinct questions. And then when I interviewed the psychiatrist, who I also had worked with to kind of work out the best way to obviously give the medicine, you know, and, you know, do it in a proper way. And so I had the voiceover, and then I also made like kind of a mood board, but of different scenes. And I knew where we were going to shoot it. So I knew, let's say for the boiler room, for example, I knew that I wanted the scene to be kind of like this. So I needed this kind of music. So I would like talk to the composer, and then this, and then so it kind of came together like that in the sense of editing the film together. But in terms of filming it, I already had certain sequences in my mind. Yeah.
And can you talk a little bit about this factory, this industrial ruin?
Yeah, so that's actually an ex-military base that was abandoned, I don't know, maybe in the 80s and stuff. So everything there is the way it was. And actually, the only interventions that have been are like the pond with the water when they're walking on that. And everything else is just left there.
It's very once again, it's progress, technological progress, and war and
yes,
bodies.
Exactly. Yeah, but also the history of psychedelics and how they were first invented with the military in mind, and then I thought it was nice to be able to then take that back, to the place where that would have come from, and do it in a different way.
Very interesting. The last question of the film is very interesting because it takes the notion that is everywhere nowadays. It's like freedom, happiness. If happiness is a human right, and of course for me more interesting than happiness is knowledge, and I think you are working about this notion also. But I think the film is also about work on yourself, work on ourselves as society, the reconciliation between the self and the universe, religious work, collective work, spiritual work, mystic knowledge. Do you agree that can be a film about work?
It is. It is about work. You're right in a sense, because I wrote it during the pandemic, so it was a time when you couldn't be together, you couldn't work, you couldn't even touch, and so this inner work became more important to a lot of people who had never really looked inside themselves. And then, but at the same time, we live in a really hyper-capitalist society, which is all about being productive. And so it's that contradiction, because we're still animals and we still have bodies. And so we still need to look after them. We're not machines. So that's the difference, because when they're in their clothes, they're still humans, let's say, and they act a bit like machines, especially at the end with the last dance. But when they're naked, they're much more like nature, they're more free, and that's when they're in the trip. And so it's that balance between the artificial, the natural, the industrial, and things like that.
And meaning,
and then in terms of work and being productive, this idea of like, just think about creativity and like how, a lot of the things that I've been doing for many years and interested in, they've been, well, not just me, but like they become co-opted, by wellness or this type of spiritual materialism that is just also about helping productivity. So the film is really about examining that as well, which is important for me as a statement. Yeah.
I think it resonates in all of our minds. Everybody deals with these questions, right? Working conditions and in academy, in the outside world, everywhere, right? In supermarkets, we see the working conditions and everywhere. So it's a very basic thing to think about health in society. So another question is that in the end of this, I have 3 questions, and then we pass the Q&A to the public, if you agree, Grace. But in the final moments of the film, you talk about this mental illness that can be a generalized problem in our societies, and therapies. But I was thinking, watching your movie, of the risks of a generalized medicalization also. And we know that medicalization can be a new ideology of children, of teenagers, of adults, of seniors, a new way of controlling energies, desire, and controlling the masses. So, and you also talk about social classes. The access to medicines is not the same.
Exactly, or healthy
a report
food.
To classes. Can you talk a little bit about it?
Yeah, the access to healthy food, education, clean air. This is, it's definitely about segregating let's say, or separating people into groups, you know, people who have access to, you know, as I was just saying, this wellness thing, you know, whereas I always find it ironic that things that are called organic now, obviously for centuries they were just normal vegetables, you know, and now they're like organic simply because they don't have the you know, the chemicals on, but actually that's how it used to be. So it's like, yeah, just examining those, you know, contradictions and, yeah, hypocrisies, yeah.
You were talking about nudity also, and one thing that touched me in this second movie was the quality of the tissues, the textures. We feel the textiles, and
yeah.
when I remember that your studies, your basic studies were in textiles,
Yes.
and the styling is yours,
Yeah.
and wardrobe, I think it's a good lesson for students of cinema that, like Visconti,
Yes.
had this attention to tissues, to the light, how the light reflects on the tissues for cinema construction. It's very touching in your film, the presence of the textiles,
Yes.
in opposition also to nudity.
Yes.
Can you talk about these details?
Well, I think for me, I guess it's about painting. You know, I didn't study painting, but I've always been very obsessed with painting. And so this idea, you know, because also you can see in my films, I've got three distinct camera movements. I have like this thing, which is called the spiral, which is kind of like where you have the undulation of time, the in and out of time. And then I have this fixed frame. So this is to do with painting and composition, where the textiles comes in, and art history. And this idea of zoom and aspect ratio change. So, yeah, I feel like also I think for me also B-roll is very important. This is another type of way of making texture, you know, because you get those magical moments from having a B-roll camera, or, you know, like when she's smoking, when she's picking up the glass. This is also texture as well, which is, yeah, is somehow connected to painting. So, yeah, and frame.
Of course. You are talking about the camera movements, and in the first film and in the second film, we have the zoom in, like a scientific observation. There is something like this, or
I can, well, for me, it's I'm inspired by The Conversation by Coppola, because I always wanted to zoom in, and then I saw that film, I thought he did it, you know, The Conversation. His zooming is crazy, right? I mean, my zooming, the camera was about this big, the zoom, right? So it was a really long zoom in, but yeah, it's to get into how to get into the action, you know. Because otherwise you're cutting from here to here, and I really wanted this kind of process, this slow process drop in, and I guess it is reminiscent, yeah, of those older films, and how, yeah. Yeah.
From it's an historical.
Yeah, references.
Reference,
yeah,
of course,
yeah.
from the 60s, 70s, that comes from TV, from television. You talk about history of art, and of course, watching these naked bodies, we have all the spectrum of the shapes of history of art, from sculpture to painting to Greek vases. Everything is there, right?
Yes.
Everything is there, and you have this knowledge. But when I see these choreographed movements they do in line, I remember, of course, Metropolis of Fritz Lang. And if the film is about work, of course, Fritz Lang and the fascism or the totalitarianism in work or in cities comes to mind. Can you comment this? You had this in mind or not at all?
Well, not that, but I was thinking more Janet Jackson versus, I was thinking music video. No, but actually, it's about beauty, isn't it? You know, and I feel like I like film when it's visceral, and, you know, it can be very like, you know, like that feeling, like we were talking about Days of Heaven, Terrence Malick, or, you know, this kind of like very cinematic, but you know, how beauty is kind of, it can give this idea of an access point into something. So like when she's doing that advert, you know, it can remind you of Chanel, it can remind you of Godard and things. But actually what she's saying is she's selling death, because she's talking about, you know, us living on a planet with 500 SPF, which means we would have to live on the sun if we need 5,000 SPF cream, you know, and that's what all adverts do. They all sell death in a way, you know, but it's packaged. So I'm quite interested in that kind of irony, and that's also what wellness is doing, you know. So it's like, how do you use beauty? And yeah, it's connected to art history, like the death of Sardanapalus, you know, Delacroix, you know, which is a really beautiful painting, but it's about rape and things. So, you know, I think art history has always played with the two sides. And, yeah, cinema.
Of course.
Yeah.
And your work is about contestation of the status quo. It's about criticism, that's clear. That's why it's so intelligent. But it's somewhere else beyond anger or violence.
Yeah.
It's on the side of beauty and poetry.
Yeah.
It's an option, right? It's an ethical option. Can you talk a little bit about it?
Yeah, like healing is an ethical option, you know, like even this whole thing at the moment with Kamala and Tim about joy, her being a joyful. Yeah, it's a huge statement in a way, because like it's like the complete opposition to this like negativity, cynical, you know, and so yeah, it's really important to have like that as an anchor. I mean, because for me, the people that I've always looked at, I've always seen, you know, they're always like in terms of where it's the Dalai Lama or Marianne Williamson or people, you know, people who are working in spirituality and politics, you know, they always have that combination of being able to, you know, be grounded, but also have this idea of doing something socially benefiting, you know. So it's not just activism and anger for the sake of anger, and it's also not just pretending there are no problems and, you know, being hedonistic. It's both. So yeah, I think that's what I'm interested in.
Of course,
Yeah.
it's there in the work. And to finish, you have here these two movies that we saw in a traditional condition, but you work also on installation
Yes.
conditions. And you were talking to me about these video art films you do, or these
Yes.
films of another scale. Can you talk a little bit how they are different in the methodologies and in the relation to the public?
I mean, because, yeah, so like when you show work in a gallery or museum, obviously it changes your sense of time, because it's much more like painting. You walk in and out of the room. You as the viewer have the control of when you start watching and when you finish. Whereas in the cinema, you're being led on a journey. And I like both of those types of situations for different reasons. But for example, with Black Beauty, I showed it in the cinema, like now, but I also have showed it as a 2-channel installation, you know, with one side where it's the desert and then the other side is the interview. And what happens is people can get stuck in the room for hours and watch it, because they get stuck in the loop of the film, you know, because they'll come in and then they'll be in the conversation, and then they'll wait this conversation, and then they have to start the conversation, because it is a conversation that is kind of like a spiral anyway. It's like a circle, you know. Sometimes I'm watching it and I'm like, oh yeah, you know, I learned something new, even though I know that sounds crazy, but like it has that hypnotic quality. And so I feel like installation can also emphasize that in a different way than, you know, being in the cinema.
Thank you, Grace. I think it's time. Andrea, can you have the microphone for the public, please? Q&A moment, questions or ideas that you want to share with us. There is a microphone we can pass hand on hand. There is no assistance, so let's be autonomous as public, but it's your time. It's an important time of sharing.
Okay, good one.
Obrigado, André.
Yeah, so hi. First, thank you for coming. It was very nice to see these films. I'm not personally familiar with your work, but I had a question about the second film actually becoming planned.
Mm-hmm.
And a big theme in the film seems to be like the limitations of individual perception
Mm-hmm.
and kind of how we transcend those. And it appeared to me in the film that you kind of tried to deconstruct this limitation
Mm-hmm.
through the title, No, Becoming Plants, and also
Mm.
at points the dancers seem to be kind of operating as some collective mind.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just wondering if you'd be able to speak maybe a bit more to your intention behind how you deconstructed this.
Yeah, because I'm trying to think about film as process, and so also as the mind as a screen. So like in terms of when you meditate, you think of mind as screen. So it's like I'm mixing these different languages because of my own spiritual training and background. So on side note, if you go on my website, you'll see I have an art CV, but I also have a spiritual CV because you can see all the kind of different trainings and retreats I've been doing. So I've always been very interested in how the mind perceives, not just language, it's more about time and space. And so cinema is very a powerful way to show that, you know, and the process of, it's like taking in information, but also the relationship process. But even when she's talking, what's really interesting, she's talking about two bodies relating to each other, or her having to forget that she's a person watching another body, but then we're also watching this other body, you know. So I love this film within a film thing, but here it's even more stronger in a way because we're talking about minds within minds, and also that's also what happens when you're on a trip, that you go to this other state of mind. So it's also, so I'm trying to give the feeling of being in a trip without being in the trip. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Cool. Thank you.
Next question, there is one. Can you pass, please, hand on hand? Yes, thank you. Collective work.
yeah, labor.
Hello, thank you for the films. I wrote my question down, so I have it, so I don't forget. As a cinematographer, I'm quite interested about the pre-production, especially with the cinematographer, and what kind of conversation you had about the nudity and about filming the nudity. Maybe it's about both of the projects. Did you have some guidelines for the working, or what kind of conversations you had about the gaze and everything before filming?
Yeah, so for the first, when she's outside on the rock, we filmed that at sunrise. So obviously there was a conversation about the weather. I mean, the weather was going to be good, but it was freezing because obviously it's 5 a.m. And we knew we'd have to get the, you know, and get the shot and stuff. And so we did some sort of mapping out of the scene before we went on site. And then when we were on site, you know, the actress, she had, you know, we had all the blankets, we like set it up. So she would only have to be naked for like 5 minutes, then we'd film and then put some clothes, then we'd do again, you know, so we'd do it like that. So the cinematographer had already prepared like the Alexa and had his crew already set everything up. So the actress wasn't waiting to be naked, you know. So that's also what happened in the other film as well. We tried to set up the, you know, the equipment beforehand, so then people aren't just hanging out, you know. Yeah, being naked. Yeah.
Thank you.
Next question, behind you.
Well, that's
Thank
convenient.
Hi Grace, thank you for being here and showing us your beautiful films. Since we are in university, I wanted to ask, how did you become a filmmaker? Why did you become a filmmaker? And how was your trajectory? And also this decision of making films more for cinema or more for visual arts? I'm also a filmmaker and I'm in between those two places, so I wanted to ask, how was that for you?
Yeah, so as I think I said, I never went to film school. So, and I actually didn't study fine art, I studied fashion and textiles. So I just loved cinema and film. So when I was actually doing textile art, I started making my own films. And then I would justify to the teachers, because like the tutors were like, yeah, but what's that got to do with textiles? And I'd be like, yeah, but I'm stitching together images and, you know, and all this and stuff. But I made loads of work, and then it was quite funny because like literally 2 weeks before the graduation, not the ceremony, but the graduation, they were like, we don't know if we can like pass you because you haven't done any textile stuff. But I was like, yeah, but I've made loads of work. But also there was a visiting tutor from St. Martin's, and he said, the work's really good, you have to pass her. And so it was like that, you know, and so in the end, they gave me my degree. Because I'd literally done the most work in the whole class, but it just wasn't what they wanted me to do, okay? So then that's where my rebellion began, in terms of mixing mediums and things. And then I taught myself just how to make videos. I just got a computer and taught myself Adobe Premiere. Making video art. So as I said, like filming everything, doing everything, very lo-fi and stuff. But then after 10 years of that, then I was, you know, doing, I started to open up, do live performance and painting and photography, other things. And then I wanted to start making films. And then that was the whole thing, oh, do I have to go to film school? And I had friends who were teaching, you know, Cal Arts, and they were like, you don't need to go to film school. You just need to make a film. And I was like, yeah, I just need to make this bloody Black Beauty film. And so then I found a way to make it, because I decided, well, I was having these exhibitions, and I thought, if I just ask every venue to give me a little bit of money, if it goes wrong, then they're not really losing that much, you know, it's not that much money. So I just asked a few venues to give me a little bit of money, and then I applied for some Arts Council money, and that's how I made the first film. I found a producer, she was a young producer, but she'd made some films, and so, yeah, we worked together on that in that way. And then with the second film, it was also art money as well, and the budget was a little bit more, but not like tons more. So, and now I'm actually working on making a feature film, like with a narrative, like more like art house kind of film. And so, you know, that's the other thing. I've been, you know, writing scripts for the last 7 years, just for myself, writing feature scripts. And now, you know, how to translate these ideas into more of a narrative is going to be quite interesting. So I don't know if that helps. Oh, yeah. And then, yeah, obviously being a visual artist, you know, going back and forth, it's just, I think it's quite natural way of being, you know, like we were talking about Chantal Ackerman, and, you know, there's lots of people who, you know, navigate both cinema and visual art.
Thank you. Good question there.
Hello. Thank you so much for showing your movies. I would like to ask about the last scene of the last movie, because we have like a red screen, and then there was like a kind of disclaimer of the psychedelics because of the mental health when people go sick, mental health.
I don't think it's a disclaimer. You mean just the credits, when they're walking and then she's talking about mental health?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
That was something that you thought about it, or was something that a producer thought about it, like it's better for you to put that?
No, because it's not a disclaimer. It's like there are good things about psychedelics and things, but there are also negative sides like psychosis and things. So, and I feel it's really important to explore both sides and try to, you know, open the debate. And the whole thing about mental health, I mean, the whole film is really about the mental health issue, and, you know, how work and overworking and, you know, how we're all being pressed. And so, yeah, it's just, mental health is deeply connected to capitalism and economics, so it has to be part of the conversation.
Thank you.
It's 5:30. Last question. There is a last question. Can you pass please microphone? Thank you. Thank you.
Hi. So I was just wondering about your relationship to the people you work with in the films. So it seems like, of course, the relationships are quite different. In the first one, maybe I would imagine you have some paid actors, and in the second one, there's of course this thing of the drug, and you know, it seems like they're all in different type of contact with each other, right? So I was curious about your relationship with, you know, your participants in the films.
Yeah, I mean, everybody gets paid. I mean, not loads, but everybody gets paid. I mean, it's low-budget filmmaking, isn't it? So, but yeah, it's important that everybody gets paid something. Yeah, in the first film, I mean, Borges, he's a film actor, so he was a quite famous actor in the 1970s, you know, and he's done films with Milos Forman and Donald Sutherland and stuff. So it was really amazing that he would want to do a film like this, you know, considering his background and stuff. But like over the years, obviously, you know, he's from Argentina, but he lives in Madrid. He was doing television, and then he kind of lost favor, and so he was kind of excited to, you know, to experiment on something like this. So he was willing to take a pay cut to, you know, do something like this. And then Karen Roberts, she's a model normally, and so this was like, she's done a little bit of adverts and stuff, so this was a big deal for her to try to, you know. And so, and then with the dancers, they're all paid the same, and some of them knew each other, some of them didn't. Yeah, so, but yeah, everybody needs to get paid, otherwise it would be really, I think.
Yeah. But did you like know about these dancers before, or how did you create this group?
No, one of the dancers, they found the other dancers, and then I interviewed about 10 or 15 people, and these were the ones that wanted to do it. So, yeah.
So, there is a last question, or can we finish here? And so, first of all, thank you, Grace Ndiritu. I ask you a and thank you. It was generous from you all this time and this screening, double screening. And I invite you, all of you, please feel free to come. The old program is free entrance, as you can see. Bring family, friends, because it's a program for the city. And the next guest will be Daniel Blau-Fuchs, that is here with us. And Daniel Blau-Fuchs is one of the most important photographers in Portugal, and has in this moment an exhibition in MAT Museum. So see the exhibition if you can, and come the September 17th, okay, in 1 week. We'll receive Daniel Blau-Fuchs, and please come and invite everyone who can come also. Okay, thank you for your presence. Thank you, Grace.
Thank you. Thank you.
You had a great, what are you talking about?
Yeah, great,
Very
nice.
attentive,
Yeah, very nice people.
Starting
students.
from 5 people start, some people start.
Oh yeah, yeah,
because
it's
of
normal.
public transport.